Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's Race C is actually a brand new combination, I think, or at the very least we haven't had it in years. There is a clear meta, but I think I found a very good anti-meta. Let's get into it. The anti-meta car of the week is the Hyundai NVGT. It doesn't quite handle as well as the R18, and it's actually noticeably slower in a few of the sections. However, if you can get in front of the R18, even with full slip, it's not going to be able to pass on the straight. The tire wear actually seems just as good as the R18, so there's no real need to change the tires when you have to take the mandatory pit stop. I managed to get a 656.3, putting me in first place for the Hyundais, first place for anything not the R18, and 14th overall. You'll actually see in the lap that I completely lost control, slid out, and almost crashed the car. This car can definitely do a mid to low 655. While a few other cars are almost as good, I think this car is the best option against the R18. The track kind of indents just a little bit as you brake, so keep that in mind as you position yourself for the first braking zone, which is going to be right before the grass starts, right before the 100-meter board here on the left. Downshifting all the way to second gear, you want to turn in after the 50-meter board, continuing to downshift all the way to first gear, and I want you to pay close attention to this. If you hit the curb just like this, there's a big drop-off and you could hop the car. It can make the car rotate, but it can also make the car really unstable, so be very careful there. Adding a little bit of throttle, I like to aim all the way to the point where we're almost facing that first cone there on the right. Aiming for the complete other side of this wall here on the left, you want to add just a tiny bit of brake, upshift to second gear, and get on that throttle as soon as you apex. If I had waited to turn just a little bit longer, I'd be able to get on that throttle a lot heavier. In fact, I've been able to do this sector about a tenth faster because, of course, if you go on the grass, it's going to slow you down just a little bit, but if you don't take too much grass, then it won't give you a penalty. Looking for the cones that block off this section of the track here on the right. Once you get all the way past that final one, you're going to hit the brakes. Trail brake very gently in third gear, and once you come off the brakes, you can continue adding steering to ride the curb a little bit longer, and it will continue decelerating the car. Get on that throttle and squeeze as much of it as you can until you get to the end of the curb here on the left. You should be approximately in the middle of the track, as you can see here. Gentle brake down to second gear and immediately try to hit this apex. You can see that I braked too hard, causing understeer, and that made it take a lot longer. In fact, I completely missed the apex. Your goal is to get fully on that throttle as soon as you can, right out to this curb, and then stay fully pinned until the next braking zone. Hug the left side of the track, and you're going to look for the concrete runoff here on the left. Position your car all the way on top of it, and right before you get to the inside curb here on the right, that's when you're going to hit the brakes and immediately dive into the corner. I like to continue braking heavily until I'm facing the middle of this grass patch here in the middle of the sand. Then I come all the way off the brakes in first gear, turn in heavily before shifting up to second gear and then getting full throttle. If you manage to hit that inside curb, you should be able to ride all the way up to this curb and stay full throttle all the way through this section. There's no need even to lift here, but once you go on this curb, if you hit the inside curb just a little bit, it will rotate the car, so you won't have to continue steering. In fact, if you steer too much, it might slide you out. Putting half your car beyond the white line, once your entire car gets into this gray section of pavement right here after the bricks, that's when you want to hit the brakes. Once your entire car gets into the green, then you're going to start turning in, downshift to second, and then as soon as you hit this curb, get back on the throttle gently. If you hit it too heavily, you will understeer. Continue steering to the left until you get to the end of this curb here on the right. You're going to notice that I changed directions entirely before then coming off the throttle and then adding a little bit of brake. Dipping to second gear briefly will allow you to come off the brakes earlier, and when you come off the brakes, the car will really start to rotate. As soon as you get on the curb, you want to get in third gear and then get on that throttle as heavily as you can, tracking out all the way here, but of course, don't touch that sand and don't touch the grass after. Putting your tires just on the low side of the curb here will get it to rotate a little bit, but if you add too much steering while you do that, it might make you slide out. Right before the 50-meter board here is the braking zone. You want to dip down to third gear as quick as you can, turn in, and then get back up to fourth before you hit that first bollard. You want to try to miss the second one and continue steering to the right, looking for these shadows right here. I usually wouldn't use any kind of light source as a braking marker, but since the conditions are always the same on the first lap, it's the best we can do, and you'll just have to trust your instincts when you're actually in the race. Avoid going full brakes because you can get some nasty understeer here. When you pass this little cylindrical structure here on the right, then you should be in second gear and fully turning in. I should have dipped down to first gear to hit that apex, but I thought I could keep more speed, and instead I just understeered, which delayed the amount of time it took me to get on the throttle. Full throttle in second gear, but you want to aim it so you can go past the white line when you brake, which is at the end of this red part of the barrier here on the right. Immediately trail brake in second gear, and once again the car is going to rotate a lot once you come fully off the throttle, so let the car coast just a little bit. Make sure the car rotates enough so that you don't understeer over this curb. If you use too much of that curb, it will pull you in the grass and you will crash. Slowly track out to the left, trying to get to the left side of the track before you get to this sign here, and after that sign is when you're going to turn in. You do not need to lift off the throttle whatsoever. As we approach the next braking zone, you're going to notice that there's a shadow on the ground that correlates with this triangle structure here on the fence, and that is when we want to hit the brakes. Downshift to fourth and continue scrubbing speed off as you hit this first apex. You want to continue steering to the left until you get to the end of this curb here on the left. And you can notice that I also did not actually hit the apex. It's because if you do hit that curb, it's going to bounce you and you're going to crash. Add a little bit more brake as you downshift to third, late apex this corner, and then get fully back on the throttle in third gear. It doesn't matter if you track out to the left because you do not need to stay to the right for this next left turn. Hitting a late apex on this curb, you want to wait until you get to the end of that curb before you then change directions and add just a little bit of brakes. With most cars, I actually like to use a lot of this curb, but I don't dare use any more than the red and white part. It will make the car jump. Once again, the end of the curb here on the right is when you want to change directions, add just a little bit of brake, and I do like to downshift to second gear, but I get back up to third gear before I get on the throttle. Third gear is really important for maintaining momentum and getting a really good exit here. Of course, you want to let the car rotate enough that you don't go in the grass because that will cause you to crash. This largest piece of graffiti and this dark spot on the barrier here on the left are your clues. When you get to that dark spot on the barrier on the left, that's when you want to hit the brakes. Dipping down to second gear really quickly will allow you to slow down and rotate that car really quickly too, so you can get up on this curb and then back on full throttle before the end of that curb. You want to be in third gear and hitting that throttle, like I said, before you get off that curb. It's very important to lengthen all of the full throttle sections as much as you can. Not only you're not going to have to lift for fluke plots at all, but the car's actually going to probably steer a lot better than you expect. If you steer too much and you hit the curbs, like I said before, it can make the car actually slide out. So be very gentle with all of your steering and steer as little as you possibly can throughout pretty much all of the really high speed sections. Staying full throttle, you can use this sign here on the right to indicate when you want to turn in, and you do want to stay as close to the inside before this crest as you possibly can. Once you get to the end of this curb, that's when you're going to hit the brakes. Brake in a straight line and align yourself all the way on the left side of the track, and right at the end of the grass here on the right at the beginning of that pavement, that's when you're going to start turning in. You want to get to second gear as you apex and stay on that apex for a long time, getting back up to third gear before then getting on the throttle. Of course, you want to wait long enough that you don't go high on this curb. If you go high on the curb, it will pull you off the track and you will crash. Just like all the other high-speed sections, you want to steer as little as you possibly can. All of these curbs give you clues as to where you should be touching them just gently. Once the elevation starts going up, you're going to look for this sign on the other side of the fence. You do not need to lift off the throttle at all just yet. In fact, you want to stay fully pinned as you take a little bit of the grass and then gently come off the throttle before adding brakes. Gradually transitioning from throttle to brake allows the car to stay very stable, and that is important. You want to be on the left side of the track, but you don't have to be all the way on the left side of the track. It's more important to carry speed through this first part of this sector. Downshift to fourth and only brake enough to get yourself all the way to this apex before then adding throttle. You're going to look for this discolored portion of the barrier on the right, and after you fully get past that, that's when you're going to start hitting the brakes. Quickly get down to second gear and start trail braking in as soon as you get to this little crosswalk looking set of white stripes here on the middle of the track. If you find yourself understeering, which I did, you can dip down to first gear, but if you're more careful with your steering, you will not need first gear. Adding throttle between that apex and the end of this curb here on the left, you're going to wait till you get to the end of that curb there on the left before then lifting off, adding just a little bit of brakes, using a little bit of the curb, and then fully getting on that throttle. Again, waiting to make sure that you don't go past that curb. You do want to get fully on the throttle and not come off. This part of the track kind of looks generic, so it's kind of easy to miss when you need to turn in. So look for the light side of the barrier here on the right, this clump of trees, and at the beginning of the trees, that's when you're going to start turning in. Be very gentle because adding too much steering can actually cause the car to slide out here. There's some concrete runoff past the track here on the right, and before the end of it, that's when you want to hit the brakes. Starting to turn in at the beginning of the curb here, you're going to hit a late apex in second gear and then back on the throttle as soon as you do hit the apex, making sure you continue steering enough to the left so you can stay full throttle as you negotiate the right turn without hitting that inside curb. Look for this sign here on the left, and that is when you're going to hit the brakes. You want to get down to third gear and wait until you get to the curbing on the inside before you start to turn in. When you get to the end of this fence here on the left, you should be about a car width away from the inside curb, coming off the brakes in second gear, and then letting the car rotate all the way to the apex before then getting fully on the throttle in one smooth motion. As you come off the curb, you want to align yourself on the right side of the track as soon as you can before you get to this marshal here on the right. That marshal is an indicator of when you want to turn in. I like to hit this first apex, but I don't worry about hitting the second one because I want to get myself to the left side of the track as soon as I can. You don't want to continue moving to the left side of the track when you start to turn in for this next corner. The end of this concrete runoff here on the left is when you want to turn in. I waited too long to downshift to fourth and add brakes, and you'll notice that I completely missed all of the apexes. You want to actually miss this first part of the curbing, hit the second part, and then miss the third part. It's called miss, hit, miss for a reason, and I didn't do that, unfortunately. There's a discolored part of the barrier that you can see as you approach it. It's right here, and that is always my braking point for this next corner. Trail brake in third gear, getting as close to this first corner as you can, and as soon as you get past that apex, you're going to add more brake in second gear and aim for this change of barrier that you're going to see in the distance. The change in barrier is directly in front of us, and to the right you'll see the end of a curb. At the end of that curb, you're going to downshift to first gear. As soon as you get to first gear, you're going to turn in and start to trail brake. When you get to the end of this metal barrier, you should be able to come entirely off the brakes, turn more, let the car rotate, and then get back on the throttle. Take note of where I'm aiming as I throttle out of that corner. You want to make sure that you're aiming for that marshal there so you can continue staying full throttle as you then hit that next apex on the right. The car will understeer just a little bit because of how fast you're going out of that corner, but as long as you give yourself space, you should be able to hit that apex and stay fully pinned on the throttle throughout this next part of the track. As you set up for the next corner, look for the end of the curb here on the right. You're going to be very brave and brake when you get all the way to the end. Wait till you get to this concrete escape route on the right before downshifting to second gear and turning in. You want to be in second gear just briefly, back up to third gear and fully on the throttle, tracking out all the way to the right and then making sure you get all the way to the left side of the track before this next braking zone. A little bit more than a car length before the end of the curb on the left is when you want to hit the brakes. You're going to come off the brakes gently and let the car rotate up the hill. Because you go up the hill and the camber is really weird, it can be very strange as you hit the throttle. Don't be afraid to wait a really long time or even come off the throttle after initially coming on the throttle. It's really important to, of course, not go off the track. And if you get on the throttle too early, you can go all the way off the track and into the wall. As you set up for this next braking zone, you're going to notice this blue mark on the track, and right after that is a Yokohama sign on the right. At the Yokohama sign, that is when you hit the brakes really heavily. Start turning in and trail braking as you pass that fence on the left. You want to hit a very late apex on this and wait until you're sure that you can get fully on the throttle without coming off. You'll notice that I have to lift off the throttle just a little bit. Those little liftoffs cost you a lot because, like I said before, you've got to make sure that you're extending these full throttle zones as much as you can. As the track curves to the left, there are a few kinks that don't have curbs, and then there's this more severe one that does have a curb. That's the only one that really matters, and you really don't have to do anything special. You just have to make sure you don't take too much of that curb. You just want to stay really close to it. For this section, I am going to slow it down just a little bit. There's that concrete runoff right next to the barrier, and this high curb. Of course, you want to miss the high curb, but you just use that runoff as a note for when you want to turn in. There's a tiny crest right here, and when you go over it, that's when you want to start turning in, and again, avoid that inside curb. You don't want to touch it at all. I like to approach this corner from the right side of the track. When you get to the beginning of the curb there on the left, you're going to hit the brakes and then try to align yourself with the left side of the track after that curb kind of curves to the left. So unfortunately, I did this corner kind of strangely. If you look at the dark part of the barrier there on the right, that's when I wanted to start turning in and then hit a double apex, but instead I hit the first apex, didn't slow down quite enough, and then got on the throttle because I was afraid I was going too slow. You don't want to do that. If you do hit the double apex, you want to make sure you wait for the car to rotate before then getting on the throttle, and then you can get on the throttle in one solid motion. As you can see from here, I hit the throttle, came off, hit it again, and then just stayed on the throttle because I knew I went too slow. You can also just hit a late apex in which you take it more traditionally, but the way that I did it is fast enough. As you approach the carousel, you can see this big tree here on the left, and when I fully pass that tree, I hit the brakes and stay all the way on the outside of the track. Waiting until the end of the curb to turn in, you want to stay in second gear and stay heavily on the brakes because once you get into the carousel, your car is going to want to fly out. You want to come into the carousel late, exit as early as you can, and when you do exit, you want to be fully pinned in second gear, trying to hit this curb here on the exit. The earlier you can get on the throttle, the better. This car has a lot of grip, so you don't really have to worry about sliding out. For this tight left-hander, you don't have to worry about lifting off the throttle, you just have to make sure that you avoid that curb, and for this next braking zone, you also want to avoid this outside curb, and you're about to see why. Right at the beginning of this curb here, you're going to hit the brakes and you're going to start turning in while just barely touching the brakes. Unfortunately, that's not what I did. I touched the curb and it made me slide out, so you're not going to be able to see exactly how to do this correctly, but I do think it's pretty straightforward. You want to hit a late apex on this next curb, and I actually did follow the line after I slid out. You're going to see what happened. As you can see, I barely grazed the curb and it caused me to rotate way too much and slide out and almost crash. Now, because this lap was good except for this, I'm going to still include this, but I'm going to jump to the actual race itself where I took the corner correctly. Right before you get to that outside curb, you're going to downshift to fourth and very gently brake as you turn in. You're going to notice the car turns in a little bit better here than in other corners, so you're going to want to come off the brakes and then use the throttle to balance. Come off the throttle a little bit as you negotiate the right, and then back on the throttle as you get up onto this curb. At this red part of the barrier here on the right, you're going to downshift to third gear and trail brake as you turn in. Notice that the car is going to be unstable as you come off the curb, so you want to stay on the brakes for a little bit longer. Once you hit the apex, get fully on the throttle and track out to the left. If you do go in the grass here, it's not the end of the world. You just want to get back on the track as soon as you can. All in all, I think I probably lost 2, 3, or maybe even 4 tenths right here, and it probably overheated the tires, which made it even more difficult to hit my marks. But as you can see, after we hit this apex right here, it was back to business as usual. The track kind of curves into the left, but you don't need to follow it exactly. You just want to make sure you're on the left side of the track before you get to this pole right here, and that's when you want to start turning in. Staying full throttle as you stay as close to this curb as you can, you're going to notice that after it curves here, it straightens out just briefly before the end, and as it straightens out, that's when you want to lift off the throttle, turn in, and add just a little bit of brake. As you hit this first part of the curb, you'll notice that if you come off the brakes and add throttle, the car will continue rotating. Staying full throttle, you want to go all the way up to the top of the curb. At the end of the curb, that's when you want to switch directions and try to use just as much of the next part of this curb. And if you did it all right, you do not need to come off the throttle at all. About a car length before the end of the curb here on the left, you want to brake heavily, downshift all the way to the third gear, and then turn in at the end of that curb. Even though there's a crest here, this car has so much downforce that you can still stay on the throttle before the crest and not worry about going off, especially with that runoff there. Try to get to the right side of the track before that Yokohama sign, and right before you get to it, that's when you're going to hit the brake and immediately start turning in. I like to try to maintain a lot of speed here while tucking the corner in and hitting a super late apex. I like to just make sure that I'm aligned with the left side of the track right at the end of this runoff right here. Right at the beginning of the grass after the concrete on the left, that's when I hit the brakes and immediately trail brake in, trying to hit this apex a little late. Not super late. In fact, you can hit right in the middle of it, get on the throttle, and the car should still rotate. As long as your right tires are still touching the curb, you should be fine, but you want to make sure that your left tires are the ones on the curb by the time you hit the brakes. You want to hit the brakes right about the last red part of the curb, and you're immediately going to start trail braking in. You want to stay on the brakes a little bit longer than usual because it is an uphill weird corner. This is actually known as YouTube corner because of how many people have crashed in compilations on YouTube. Move to the right side of the track, but look on the left side, and when you see these nice little colorful flowers here on the left, that's when you're going to hit the brakes, right as soon as you get past them. Stay on the right side of the track and start turning in right at the beginning of that big chunk of graffiti. You want to apex just about when you get to this marshal. When you get on the throttle, you can actually go all the way up on this curb, and if you make the mistake of putting just your left tires on that curb, you're actually going to be fine as long as you don't jump your car. It's pretty risky, so I wouldn't advise going that far off. For this next braking zone, you'll notice that there's a big crest. Right before the crest, I like to gently touch the brakes and then heavily hit them as the car settles. Immediately trail brake and turn in fourth gear, and if you're patient enough to get on the throttle right after that apex, you should also be able to hit this apex, which will set you up to turn in early before this crest, hitting that apex and allowing you to track out here without going off the track. You'll notice there's another drop off here, and your goal should be to be on the inside of the track without adding too much steering. If you do that, it can upset the aero and actually cause the front end to lift off with this car. This is a full throttle section, so I'm just going to give you a few notes. You want to turn in at the end of the curb there on the left, get close to this curb, and then just straight line to this next curb. You don't need to do much turning here, just small adjustments to make sure that you're getting really close to the curb without actually touching them and hitting them. That runoff concrete right here is very useful to set yourself on the left side for this next braking zone. Maximum bravery is required here. As you pass this marshal, that's when you're going to start gently turning in. You do not want to even come off the throttle until you get to that curb right there, and you don't want to add brakes until you're about to hit that apex. Notice how little I'm braking here. The entire goal of this is just to slow down enough that you can get to the middle of the track while the car is still stable. In this small straight section between the two corners, you want to stay right in the center of the track and hit the brakes very heavily. Get down to third gear and start turning in at the end of that concrete runoff on the right. I wasn't quite aggressive enough with the brakes, so I completely missed this apex, which is pretty embarrassing, but if you turn in right at the end of that runoff, you should be fine as long as you slow down enough. Leading to the next corner, you'll notice this nice line of graffiti, and right before you get to it, that's when you want to hit the brakes. Second gear will help you rotate and decelerate really quickly. You don't want to be all the way on the inside at the beginning of this little carousel. You want to hit it late and exit it early, just like the big carousel. Make sure you exit in third gear and continue steering to the left to avoid going all the way off the track. After this last big piece of graffiti right here, there aren't a lot of really specific things that you can see very well, but there is a little bit of a black mark on the outside curb, and it's at that point you just want to lift a little bit and turn in, lifting only enough to make sure that you can get as close to the inside curb as you possibly can. Once past that apex, get fully on the throttle and start looking for this fence right here with a marshal next to it. Right before that is when you want to start turning in. If you time it right, you do not have to come off the throttle at all. I got a little scared and I lifted like 5-10% off, but I actually didn't need to do that whatsoever. It probably cost me a couple hundreds at the end. That is pretty much it, except for the really scary final sector, but at this point you can kind of take a breather. Be very careful that you don't just zone out, because you do still have to negotiate the final curbs. Like I mentioned before, I made a bunch of mistakes on this. I probably cost myself at least a half second, if not even more, throughout the entirety of the track. I think this car could probably do a 654, but it takes a lot of focus to be able to do that. Take note that I'm still apexing at these curves, or at least coming close to it. You want to align yourself on the right, and right at the end of the curve here on the right, that's when you hit the brakes. Braking heavily, you want to be in third gear before you get close to this wall here on the left. You want to use as much of the track past the white line as you can, and then start turning in right at the end of that little access road. You want to use as much of this curb as you possibly can, and when you get on the throttle, continue steering to the right, because you do not want to have to come off the throttle to negotiate the left. If you hit that apex too early, you will probably go into this wall, and it's going to cost you a lot. You do not want to come off the throttle after you get on it, after that last right corner. All right, that was tough. I'm going to try to give you as many of my thoughts as possible as we go through a full speed lap. As I always mention, you've got to make sure that you're preparing for when you brake, because the track kind of moves into the right, so you've got to turn in a little bit right before you hit the brakes. I usually avoid that inside curb because there is a drop off, but it can let the car rotate, so I try to use it. I turn in a little bit too early, so I wasn't able to get fully on the throttle as early as I would like to, and in fact, I've gone about a half of a tenth faster through there. I missed this apex here on the right because I braked too heavily, not because I waited too long. You can actually wait that long and just brake a little bit more gently, and you don't have to worry about as much understeering. The way I imagine this hairpin is trying to wrap myself as far around it as I possibly can before then fully coming off the throttle, aiming, and then just full throttling it straight out. You want to, of course, hit that apex, but as long as you get fully on the throttle and you don't worry about lifting off, then you should have a lot of speed coming out of it. The car likes to understeer as you dip into second gear, so be very wary of that. You might have to slow down a little bit more than you think, and when you turn here on the right, it's going to feel like you're going too slow, but again, it's really important to just get on the throttle as hard as you possibly can, more so than carrying a lot of speed on that last right-hander. This chicane is probably going to take a lot of practice. You want to carry as much speed as you possibly can, but if you don't decelerate properly, then you're probably just going to go all the way out the track on the left. There's no real good point to determine exactly where you want to brake for this left-hander, and don't be afraid to dip down to first gear. I just completely missed that apex and cost myself a lot of time because I wanted to carry too much speed through there. The line you take through here matters, but you do not have to come off the throttle. When you brake into this next corner, you essentially want to wrap your car as far to the left as you can before then turning to the right. That way you can carry a lot more speed through the right-hander, and that makes a big difference in your total time. That big curve that we just avoided, if you go over it, it's probably going to make your car completely jump and spin and hit the wall. I usually like to take a lot of that curb, but the track kind of has a dip right afterwards, and this car is way too low for that. I mentioned this a couple times, but if you turn too much as you hit the curbs are actually going to make the car rotate just a little bit. I like to avoid hitting most of them when I'm going really fast, because the car will turn a lot more than you expect if you use a lot of the curbs while you're turning. There's a big crest on this really fast left-hander, so I like to be up against the curb before that crest. A late apex here tends to just slow me down too much, so I treat it like a long apex. I get close to that apex as early as I can, and I stay close to it until it's time to hit the throttle. You can actually be a little bit more brave than I was when it comes to this next really fast left-hander. You can use a lot more of the grass too, but if you use too much of the grass and you're still turning to the left, it can just catch and make the car fly into the wall. Like I mentioned before, I actually braked too heavily, causing understeer. You can probably brake at the same time, just use less braking or less steering, and you won't have to use first gear in that tight left-hander. This corner is the perfect speed and shape, so that if you turn too much, the car will just slide out for no reason. It's actually kind of hard to do, but it is not impossible to slide out there. You should be able to take it full throttle as long as you steer gently, but you can definitely just slide out entirely if you take that corner too quickly. This next right-hander is the famous miss, hit, miss. Instead, I missed, and it is slower when you do it like that. When it comes to this extremely tight left-hander, it's much better to slow down too much than to carry too much speed through there. If you carry too much speed, it's going to make you wait an incredibly long time to get on the throttle, and if you slow down too much, then you can just focus entirely on getting on the throttle and staying on the throttle. This weird right-hander gets a lot of people, so just be really gentle on it until you're really, really confident with exactly the shape and the elevation of that corner. It can be really tricky. This is probably the most important corner on the track. You do want to focus entirely on your exit, but if you lose too much speed, if you go down to second gear, then you're going to waste a lot of time. You got to carry a good amount of speed, but also get on that throttle early and heavily. There are a lot of corners in this track where a slower car, like a Group 4 or Group 3, you're going to need to brake or at the very least lift off. This car has so much downforce, you don't have to do either of those things, but you still have to follow the correct line to make sure that you don't have to do those things. If you turn in too late and you use that runoff on that really fast left-hander, the grass can catch the tires and it will make the car do funny things. Like I mentioned, I wanted to double apex this. Instead, I hit one super early apex, and that's definitely not the way to do it, but as long as you keep a lot of speed and get on that throttle early, you should be fine. This carousel can be done a lot better. You want to make sure that you're decelerating into the middle of it and then getting on that throttle as soon as the car rotates. I kind of hesitated and did a little too much of both. Now, you know I completely messed this one up, but I want you guys to see it full speed because I was just happy with how I recovered. And that's not my only big recovery of the day. I'm going to show you something crazy during the actual race itself. When you use the curbs for this next left-hander, the car can try to rotate more than you want, so just be very wary of the fact that the car is going to do a lot more when it comes to steering than you might be expecting. This left-hander is probably faster if you stick closer to the inside, but I like to just make sure I'm really set up for the right-hander. There's kind of a fake apex that I hit. You want to apex just a little bit later than that, but if you hit early, just be very gentle on the throttle because going uphill while you're turning and getting on the throttle can be pretty sketchy. Luckily, this car is very stable, but it is definitely possible to get the car to do crazy things if you brake way too heavily as the car is dropping down there. And for this one, like I mentioned, you want to be on the inside and not steering too much. If you are steering too much or if you hit it at a weird angle, the arrow kind of gets funny, and I think that air can get under the car and just send it really sideways there. Again, I missed that apex like I missed a lot of them before. You can go a lot faster if you hit the apex. That's not a mystery at all. Oftentimes, the end of this race comes down to who has the slipstream, and if you're very brave through this really fast set of right-handers, it could mean the difference between not letting someone behind you have the slipstream or catching slipstream from someone in front of you. When it comes to this car versus the R18 actually cannot pass this car on the straight even if it has slipstream unless there's another one or another car bumping it. And even if you have an R18 in front of you that is bumping with another R18, you can get in front of both of those because the car is so fast on the top end. You've got to be really brave in the braking zone here, and I do like to get really close to this left-hand wall, but of course if you hit that, it's game over, and if you try to steer too much after it, the track can get kind of slippery past that white line, and it is possible to slide out there when you're trying to brake. And like I mentioned before, you want to get on that throttle early and not come off it for that final full throttle section. So like I said before, I think this is actually the very first time that we've had this specific race combination. I'm not sure if we ever did this in GT Sport, but I don't actually remember doing the full set of Group 1 cars at the Nurburgring, at least not in the full 24-hour setup like this one. After I noticed that our friend Tinsley had set a really good time with this car, he had the world record, I decided I wanted to jump on it, and I was hoping that this would be the anti-meta, but I was kind of worried that it was going to be the meta, and I would have to figure something else out. I quickly got the very first or the second sub 7-minute time in the world, and I had the world record for a minute, and of course that changed. But this car does have a phenomenal amount of potential. I do still think the R18 is the superior car, and it's definitely the meta. It's definitely easier to drive, but I think if you squeeze every bit of performance out of this car, then it's going to be a lot closer to the R18 than people may realize. When it comes to the race itself, I think it's actually superior as long as you have figured out how to drive it, and by the time I did this race, I had not quite figured out how to drive this car correctly. If you can set yourself up correctly for this first set of corners, which is going to be very difficult with people being absolutely crazy, as you can see right there, it looks like Clubsport Pace squeezed our friend Plaka Plum into the wall, and then someone else in an R18 spun out right in front of us. If you can get a really good exit, I think that you can beat the R18s out of that corner. Now, this was a lot of fun. Clubsport and I have spent a lot of time racing each other, and so I think we both trust each other for the most part. So it was really cool going side by side for so long and noticing both the strengths and the weaknesses of the cars. It looked like I had an edge until it came to this corner, and then it looked like he had the edge, but then the acceleration took over, and once again, we were completely side by side. I wasn't quite sure how this car was going to handle there, so I lifted off just a little bit. I think I could have steered a little bit harder and stayed on the throttle and then been clearly ahead of him, but I didn't want to take the chance and ruin his race. After I lost out on that left-hander, I realized I definitely wasn't going to be able to keep up on the outside there, so I decided to slot behind him and then hopefully stick with him and not get passed by any other R18. For the record, I do think the R18 is better for the first sector, the GP section, but I think this car is better at this specific corner, which is why I did decide to continue defending against Mike and trying to stick with Clubsport. The car has such incredible acceleration that if you do end up dipping down to first gear just to get it to rotate, you can then go back to second gear and then pretty much just floor it after the car rotates, and as you can see, it can keep up with the insanely fast R18. While there's just a little bit of regular racing action, we're going to talk about the strategy. Now, you do not have to take tires, but I think some people are choosing to take tires, and I think if you're using another alternate car, you might have to take tires. The R18 and this car do not need to take tires. It just gets a little bit sketchier and a little bit scarier. We're going to come back to that in just a second. You can see here that Clubsport had a better exit than Child Roland, but the Hyundai is faster in the top end, so he couldn't actually do anything about it, which is why he slotted behind him, and I do not think he realized that I was there. I'm assuming he didn't realize because I don't think he'd want to give both of us damage and potentially crash. Because of that, however, I did have damage, and that meant that my top speed, which was usually my advantage here, completely disappeared, so I lost 2 positions. I had recently had a few discussions regarding the custom slip, and if you're not familiar with the custom slipstream, essentially what happens is the slipstream becomes much more powerful and the dirty air becomes much weaker, which is very good for certain classes of cars. However, in certain other classes of cars, it kind of becomes a problem, making it so you can't really get away from people even if you're much faster than those other people we're talking about. With these extremely high downforce cars, I think it actually becomes a necessity. Also, I forgot that Mr. Varial, if I cut off your nose in that last corner, I did not mean to. I thought that I was clear of you, and I'm very sorry. Varial and I are, we've been racing each other for a very long time, and Varial and I both collided with each other. Varial felt bad about it. None of it was your fault, Varial. I love you very much, buddy. Please don't feel bad about what happened earlier. I thought it was hilarious. You're amazing. Anyways, I'm jumping all over the place. What you need to know is that custom slipstream is on, so you don't have to worry about dirty air quite as much, but the dirty air effect is still there. So your car isn't going to handle perfectly when you're this close to other cars, but it's going to be a lot better than if the normal slipstream was on. Another thing you have to worry about with Gran Turismo specifically is the very strange ping pong physics. In real life, if we collided like that, chances are we would just be completely toast and off the track, but instead, the momentum kind of transfers like a Newton's cradle, and because of that, all of us collided. I think Varial felt bad about that one too. Absolutely not your fault, Varial. I think it was only because of the fact that Paris Labrador made that big mistake. Colin hit him, and then I couldn't avoid Colin, and then Varial couldn't avoid me. So again, Varial, please don't feel bad about that. Back to the actual strategy of the race, the very best thing you can do is just try to be completely alone. So if you are following a pack of people and it looks like they are going to go in the pits on the first lap, then you should not. If it looks like they're not, then maybe you should. If there's someone you really trust and you want to take their slipstream, then of course you can follow them. But this track is so long that you're going to find that you're going to be faster than some people in some sections, and they're going to be faster than you in others. And unless you absolutely know exactly how they're going to drive, it's going to be really tough to actually utilize any of the slipstream from anyone that you may know or race against. As you can see, Paris and Colin could not stop running to each other. I don't know which one of them is faster here. I'm assuming Colin is much faster, but either way, it's really dangerous to make any kind of move here. And so as much as it's going to be fun to try to pull off moves against other people and try to actually race wheel to wheel, the ultimate strategy, if you're just looking for victory or the best result that you can get, is just driving completely by yourself. So doing whatever you can to pit when no one else is and vice versa is the ultimate strategy. With that said, because of all the shenanigans earlier, I lost the slip and I wasn't able to keep up with these two R18s in that final sector, which is my favorite sector of any racetrack on Earth. Luckily, however, I was able to get within slipstream range before the back straight, and as you probably saw, I was a full half second behind both of these guys leading into that back straight. I don't actually think Mike gave Clubsport a bump draft whatsoever, but Mike was in his slipstream the entire time, and even though he was going for a move because he had that overspeed, this is the amount of overspeed I had in the Hyundai, and this is exactly why I chose this as our anti-meta car. Not only can it keep up with these other cars with the meta car throughout most of the track, it is actually much faster in the top end. Now, our buddy Velvet Thunder and Grove Street were ahead. I didn't think I was necessarily going to catch them, but I assumed that Clubsport and Mike would both stay out because there was no one else really around to slow them down. And I was hoping that if I went in the pits there, I wouldn't have to deal with either of them being able to use my slipstream when I came out. Unfortunately, one of them did follow me in. As you can see, we're not taking the tires, so essentially it's just a stop and go, but if you do take the tires, the time penalty isn't that severe, especially given how long the race is, so you really shouldn't worry about it. If you feel that you need to take the tires, just go ahead and do it. Now, it was pretty risky with me going into the pits on the very first lap because I am close to the front, or I was close to the front. I was in third place. That meant that back markers might actually be on the track right where I am as I come out when I pit that early. But luckily for me, I had completely free and clean air. Now, because the pit strategy had worked out so well, I found myself in second place going into the final lap after starting way towards the back. Now, with Mike in the meta car and me in the anti-meta car, it became the very perfect showcase of exactly what this car can do. Initially being 2 seconds behind, just like I had thought before, the first corner is dominated by this car. I was able to pick up a full half second just in that one corner. I'm not 100% certain, but I do not think Mike actually took tires in this, so I do think that we were equal when it came to the tires. As we were going through the GP section, it did look like I was able to eke out just a little bit more performance, and I was getting just slightly closer each individual corner. Jumping forward to the Nordschleife itself, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, any of my German friends, but it looked like I still maintained the exact same distance as right before we jumped ahead. We're still just about 1.1, 1.2 seconds away from each other. This section is very twisty, and like I've been saying before, I do think that the R18 is faster when it comes to handling, and this car just has the advantage in the top speed. With that said, I don't want to discount Mike's driving. As you can see, he was getting that thing to rotate real quickly. He was really driving the hell out of that car. By the end of that sector, he had gotten just about 1 or 2 more tenths on me when it came to the distance between us. By the end of that full throttle section, and of course just one corner beyond that full throttle section, I was just below 1 second away from Mike. That's entirely because of the car. On this next section, I was pretty sure he was going to be able to completely get away from me, but I was really impressed with this car's ability to maintain stability at really high speed, so I think because I was able to carry a lot of speed through there before the really twisty section, I was able to get a little bit closer, and then he was able to get a little bit further away, which made us, of course, just maintain the same distance at the end of that sector. Over the next couple sectors, I had maintained just about the same distance, but when it came to this very long full throttle section, I was really close until the exit, and Mike got 3 tenths on just a single corner. Luckily for me, however, this of course is just a full throttle section, and it's uphill too, so my car had a very distinct advantage here. I'm not exactly sure what the distance is for the custom slipstream, but I suspect it's about 1.2 seconds, because as soon as we got to about 1.2 seconds behind Mike, the distance started really dropping off dramatically. Before the braking zone, it got down to 6 tenths of a second. In this braking zone, Mike made just a little bit of a mistake, and that brought me within just 2 tenths of a second before the carousel. The carousel and pretty much everything after it before the long back straight is a handling section, so I was definitely at a disadvantage, but I thought I was going to be able to stay at least within slipstream range because of the custom slipstream and just because I absolutely love this section of the track. I was getting really excited at this point because I thought it was going to come down to a last second battle, but I immediately started making mistakes, unfortunately. Not only did I slide on that fast left-hander like I did in the guide, but then I hit this curb, which caused my car to rotate way more, which is exactly why I've been warning you guys, and that cost me an entire second. All those mistakes coming together in just the last couple corners cost me more than a second when it came to the gap between myself and Mike. Despite the fact that I had obviously been overdriving, I decided I was just going to give it everything I possibly could and just take every risk I possibly could when it came to trying to chase down Mike. If I could get within a half second of him, then I knew that I'd be able to pass him on that final straight. Unfortunately for me, all of this pushing just led to even more mistakes, and I was just trailing further and further behind Mike. After completely blowing that apex, I realized there was just nothing I could do. Mike was gone, and I was going to have to settle for second place, which of course is not very bad. Considering I did defeat the Metacar a couple times, I just couldn't defeat Mike this time, and then I got lazy. Luckily, because of all the years I spent playing Gran Turismo in my youth, I knew exactly how to pull off a J-turn, and somehow I kept it on the track. Didn't take any damage, and so I thought, if I was going to settle for second, why not settle for the podium, settle for third, and I will be happy enough with that. With that said, I actually want to show you what it looked like on my stream.
Okay. I did not actually mean to do that. Believe it or not.
After surviving all of that, I was pretty much just talking to chat, not paying attention to absolutely anything that was going on. I thought that Mike and Mike were both just well ahead, and so I did not notice that Myth Mike had to serve a penalty. If you've never been to my stream, I spend a lot of time actually trying to read chat while driving, and that almost cost me right here because I did not notice that Mike had unghosted and that he was there at all. Luckily, I saw him at the last second, got in front of him, and of course I was very happy to once again reclaim second place. As you might expect, Mike won that very easily, and I was very happy to get the fastest lap. I got a 7:10 despite that full speed wheelie and 360. I don't know what I would have gotten, but I think I would have gotten a pretty good fastest lap there. Anyways, as you can see, the R18 is a very, very fast car, but I think that if I was actually on point, I would have been able to battle Mike and potentially been able to beat him. I don't know though, because Mike was on fire, he was incredibly fast, and Mike really knows the Nurburgring. But either way, I think the Hyundai is a fantastic anti-meta car, and I think that this race is incredibly fun, so I hope you guys give it a chance. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll be leaving you with a look at my current members. I love every one of you. Thank you.